The board secretary asked for copies of all quarterly compliance reports filed between March 2022 and June 2023. She needed them for the Audit Committee's regulatory review. My regional director told her those reports had never been submitted. I'd filed 17 reports during that period. Each one documented billing irregularities, insufficient staffing ratios, and medication administration gaps across 4 facilities. Each one had been sent directly to my director with read receipts enabled. Each one had been acknowledged in our weekly calls with phrases like "noted" and "we'll address this internally." Not a single report had been forwarded to corporate compliance or the board. When the Audit Committee discovered the gap in documentation during a routine governance review, my director claimed the reports didn't exist, that I'd been verbally briefing him but never formalising anything in writing, that the lack of documentation was a performance issue he'd been planning to address. He said this in an email to the board secretary. I was CC'd. I didn't reply immediately. I opened my sent folder and started pulling file attachments. Because when someone tells the board you never documented violations that could expose the company to millions in regulatory fines, and the Audit Committee is asking to see those exact documents, silence stops being an option. My name is Diane. I joined Summit Healthcare Management in February 2022 as a compliance officer. The company operated 11 assisted living and memory care facilities across Arizona and Nevada. My role covered 4 facilities in the Phoenix metro area. I reported to Trevor Gaines, the Regional Director of Operations who oversaw all Arizona properties. The job was straightforward. I conducted monthly site visits, reviewed clinical documentation, monitored state licensing requirements, and filed quarterly compliance reports summarising any deficiencies or risks. Standard healthcare compliance work. Trevor had been with Summit for 6 years. He'd built his reputation on keeping facilities profitable and maintaining high occupancy rates. When I started, he made his priorities clear during our first meeting. "We run tight operations here," he said. "Compliance is important, but it needs to be balanced with operational reality. If you find issues, bring them to me first. We handle things internally before they become problems." I nodded. That seemed reasonable. My first quarterly report was due in May 2022. I'd completed site visits at all 4 facilities and found a consistent pattern. Staffing levels that occasionally dipped below state-required ratios during overnight shifts, medication administration records with missing signatures, and billing documentation that didn't always match service delivery records. None of it was egregious, but all of it created regulatory exposure. I documented everything in a formal report, 12 pages. I included the specific regulatory citations, the facilities where I'd observed the issues, and recommendations for corrective action. I sent it to Trevor on a Thursday afternoon with the subject line, Q1 2022 Compliance Report, Action Required. The read receipt came back within an hour. Trevor called me the next morning. "Got your report," he said. "Appreciate the thoroughness. A few of these items are already being addressed. The staffing thing is a scheduling issue we're fixing. The med records are just documentation lag. The billing stuff is a misunderstanding of how we code certain services." "Should I note that corrective action is in progress?" I asked. "No need to formalise it. I'll handle these with the facility administrators. Just keep monitoring and let me know if you see the issues persisting. The Compliance Committee guidelines say quarterly reports should be filed with corporate. That's for material findings. This is operational housekeeping. We don't need to create unnecessary alarm at the corporate level. Trust me, I've been doing this a long time. We handle minor issues locally." I didn't argue. I saved the report in my files and moved on. By August, I'd completed my second round of site visits. The staffing issues hadn't improved. One facility was consistently running one caregiver short during overnight shifts. The medication documentation was worse. I found 3 instances where controlled substances had been administered without proper witness signatures. I filed my Q2 report, 14 pages this time. I flagged the controlled substance documentation as a high priority issue and recommended an immediate audit of medication procedures. Trevor's response came 2 days later via email. Reviewed your Q2 report. The med-doc issues are concerning. I'm scheduling training sessions with the nursing supervisors. We'll keep you posted on progress. No mention of filing the report with corporate. No indication that the audit committee would be informed. I replied, "Should I forward this to corporate compliance per the quarterly reporting protocol?" His response, "Not necessary at this stage. Let's give the corrective actions time to work. If we don't see improvement by Q3, we'll escalate." I saved the email chain and the report. November brought my Q3 site visits. The controlled substance documentation had improved slightly at 2 facilities, but deteriorated at a 3rd. The staffing issues were now affecting daytime shifts at one location, and I'd discovered something new. Billing records showing private pay residents being charged for services that Medicare guidelines would classify differently. The billing issue was significant. If the state audited those records, Summit could face accusations of improper coding designed to avoid Medicare reimbursement caps. My Q3 report was 18 pages. I marked the billing findings as high risk and recommended immediate legal review. I sent it to Trevor on a Monday morning. He called me that afternoon. "Diane, we need to talk about how you're approaching these reports." "What do you mean?" "You're catastrophizing operational variations. The billing thing you flagged isn't improper coding. It's legitimate classification of services based on payer source. Our billing department knows what they're doing." The distinction between Medicare-covered services and private pay upgrades isn't clear in the documentation. Because the documentation doesn't need to spell out every nuance. The billers understand the regulations. You're creating problems where none exist. I'm documenting risk exposures. That's my job. Your job is to help us maintain compliance, not to generate reports that make it look like we're running non-compliant facilities. These reports could be misinterpreted if they ended up in front of regulators or board members who don't understand operational context. I went quiet for a moment. "Are you asking me not to file compliance reports?" "I'm asking you to use judgment. Bring issues to me, we discuss them, we fix them. You don't need to formalize every observation into a report that creates a paper trail suggesting we're negligent. The compliance manual requires quarterly written reports. To me, which you're providing. I'm your supervisor. I determine what gets escalated to corporate." I didn't respond immediately. "Understood," I said finally. I saved the Q3 report and the recording of that phone call. Arizona is a one-party consent state for recordings. I'd started recording our calls after the Q2 conversation. By February 2023, I'd completed 2 more quarterly reports. Both documented the same persistent issues: understaffing, medication documentation gaps, and billing practices that created regulatory ambiguity. Both were sent to Trevor. Both received brief email acknowledgements, followed by phone calls explaining why the issues weren't as serious as I was making them sound. None of the reports went to corporate compliance. I started keeping a separate file. Every report I sent to Trevor, I saved with metadata intact. Every email acknowledgement, every phone call summary, every assurance that corrective action was underway. I organised it chronologically in a folder labelled Compliance Documentation Archive. I wasn't planning anything specific, but I'd worked in healthcare long enough to know that when compliance violations eventually surface, the first question is always, who knew, and when did they know it? I wanted to be able to answer that question accurately. In April 2023, Summit hired a new Chief Compliance Officer at the corporate level. Her name was Patricia Voss. She came from a large hospital system with a reputation for aggressive regulatory compliance programs. One of her first initiatives was to standardize compliance reporting across all regions. She sent a memo to all regional directors and compliance officers requesting copies of all quarterly compliance reports from the previous 18 months. The memo went out on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I hadn't received any communication from Trevor about how to respond. I emailed him. Did you see Patricia's request for historical compliance reports? Should I send her my quarterly reports directly, or are you compiling them? His response came 30 minutes later. I'll handle the response to Patricia. Don't send anything directly. I replied, understood. Then I waited. The following Monday, I received an email from the board secretary, Karen Lindholm. It was addressed to all regional directors and compliance officers. The subject line read, Audit Committee Request, Compliance Documentation Review. The email explained that the Audit Committee was conducting a governance review in preparation for Summit's upcoming accreditation renewal. Part of that review required examining the company's compliance reporting processes and documentation trails. The committee was requesting copies of all quarterly compliance reports filed between March 2022 and June 2023. Karen asked that all materials be submitted within 5 business days. I forwarded the email to Trevor and asked, would you like me to compile my reports and send them directly to Karen, or will you be coordinating the regional response? 2 hours later, Trevor replied to Karen's email. I was CC'd. His email read, Karen, I've reviewed our records for the Phoenix region. Our compliance officer has been providing verbal briefings on facility operations during our weekly calls, but formal written quarterly reports have not been consistently produced. This is a documentation gap I'd been working to address with Diane. I'll have a conversation with her about formalizing her reporting process going forward. I read the email 3 times. Then I opened my compliance documentation archive folder. 17 quarterly reports, every single one sent directly to Trevor's email address. Every single one with a read receipt showing the date and time he'd opened it. Every single one with follow-up emails or recorded phone calls where he'd acknowledged the contents and described corrective actions. I didn't reply to the email thread immediately. Instead, I drafted a new email directly to Karen Lindholm. I attached all 17 quarterly reports as PDF files. I included a summary spreadsheet listing each report's date, subject matter, key findings, and Trevor's email acknowledgement. The subject line read, Response to Audit Committee Request, Phoenix Region Quarterly Compliance Reports, March 2022 to June 2023. The body of the email was brief. Karen, please find attached all quarterly compliance reports I filed for the Phoenix region during the requested period. Each report was submitted to Regional Director Trevor Gaines via email with read receipt confirmation. I have included a summary index for your reference. Please let me know if you need any additional documentation or clarification. I copied Trevor on the email. I sent it at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. Trevor called me at 4:45. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Diane, we need to talk about the email you just sent to Karen. That wasn't appropriate. You should have coordinated with me before sending anything directly to the board secretary. Call me back as soon as you get this. I didn't call back. The next morning, I received a meeting invitation from Patricia Voss, the Chief Compliance Officer. The subject line read, Compliance Reporting Discussion. The meeting was scheduled for that Friday. Trevor was not included in the invitation. I accepted. Thursday afternoon, I received another email from Trevor. The tone was different. Diane, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the compliance reporting process. I'd like to meet with you before your call with Patricia on Friday so we can align on the facts. I have time tomorrow morning at 9. Please confirm. I replied, I have a conflict at 9. I'm available after my call with Patricia if that works. He didn't respond. Friday morning, I joined the video call with Patricia at 10. She was calling from corporate headquarters in Dallas. Her video was on. Mine was on. The call was just the two of us. Diane, thank you for taking the time, Patricia said. I've reviewed the quarterly reports you sent to Karen. I also reviewed the email thread where Trevor indicated these reports hadn't been consistently produced. I'd like to understand the disconnect. I filed a quarterly report every 3 months starting in May 2022, I said. Each report was sent directly to Trevor as my supervisor. Each report documented compliance deficiencies I observed during site visits. Each report was acknowledged by Trevor via email or phone. And to your knowledge, were these reports forwarded to corporate compliance or the board? No. Trevor told me repeatedly that the issues I was documenting were operational matters that should be handled locally rather than escalated. Did you understand that to mean you shouldn't file written reports? No, he acknowledged receiving my written reports. He just didn't want them sent to corporate. He said he would determine what needed to be escalated. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Did Trevor ever explicitly tell you not to document your findings in writing? I thought about the recorded phone call from November. He told me I was creating problems by formalizing observations into reports that could be misinterpreted. He said I should use judgment about creating paper trails. But you continued to file written reports? Yes, the compliance manual requires it. And I believed the findings were significant enough to warrant documentation. Walk me through the most serious findings in these reports. I spent 20 minutes detailing the staffing violations, the controlled substance documentation gaps, and the billing classification issues. Patricia took notes. Have any of these issues been corrected? She asked. Some of the medication documentation improved after training. The staffing issues are ongoing. I haven't verified whether the billing practices changed because Trevor told me the billing department knew what they were doing. Understood. I'm going to need to conduct a more thorough review. I may need to schedule follow-up conversations with you. Are you comfortable participating in that process? Yes. One more question. Do you have documentation of Trevor's responses to these reports? Yes, email acknowledgements for most of them, and I have recordings of several phone conversations where we discussed the findings. Patricia's expression didn't change, but I saw her write something down. Thank you, Diane. I'll be in touch. The call ended. The following Monday, I received an email from Patricia informing me that corporate compliance would be conducting site visits at all 4 Phoenix facilities over the next 2 weeks. She asked me to provide my complete working files, including all documentation supporting the findings in my quarterly reports. I sent her everything. On Wednesday, I received a calendar invitation from the Audit Committee. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. The subject line read, Compliance Documentation Review, Phoenix Region. Attendees included 3 board members, Patricia Voss, Karen Lindholm, and me. Trevor was not invited. I joined the video call at the scheduled time. All 3 board members had their cameras on, so did Patricia and Karen. One of the board members, a woman named Margaret Chen, led the discussion. Ms. Brennan, we've reviewed the quarterly compliance reports you filed between March 2022 and June 2023. We've also reviewed the email correspondence between you and Mr. Gaines regarding these reports. We'd like to understand why these reports were not forwarded to corporate compliance or brought to the board's attention. I filed the reports with my direct supervisor as required by the compliance manual, I said. Mr. Gaines determined that the issues should be handled locally and did not forward them to corporate. Were you aware that the compliance manual requires regional directors to escalate high-risk findings to corporate compliance within 30 days? I became aware of that requirement when I reviewed the manual more carefully earlier this year. At the time I was filing the reports, Mr. Gaines told me he would determine what needed to be escalated. Did you ever attempt to escalate findings directly to corporate compliance? No. Mr. Gaines made it clear that all communications with corporate should go through him. Margaret looked at Patricia. What have your site visits revealed? Patricia pulled up a document on her screen. We completed site visits at all 4 Phoenix facilities last week. We verified ongoing staffing ratio violations at 2 facilities. We found continued gaps in controlled substance documentation at 3 facilities. And we identified billing practices that, while not definitively fraudulent, create significant regulatory risk if audited by state or federal authorities. How long have these issues been occurring? Based on Ms. Brennan's reports and our current findings, at least 18 months. And Mr. Gaines was aware of these issues? Ms. Brennan's reports were sent directly to him with read receipts. He acknowledged receiving them. We have email and phone records confirming he was informed of every finding. Margaret turned back to me. Ms. Brennan, why didn't you escalate these issues when Mr. Gaines didn't act on them? I considered how to answer that. I believed I was following the chain of command, I said. Mr. Gaines was my supervisor. He told me he was addressing the issues. I documented everything I found and filed it appropriately. When I became concerned that the documentation wasn't reaching corporate, I started keeping more detailed records of my communications with him. When did you become concerned? Around November 2022. That's when I started recording our phone conversations and maintaining a separate archive of all compliance documentation. One of the other board members, an older man named Robert Kellerman, spoke up. You recorded conversations with your supervisor without his knowledge?
Arizona is a one-party consent state. I was legally permitted to record conversations I was participating in. I did so because Mr. Gaines was verbally acknowledging serious compliance issues while simultaneously instructing me not to create formal paper trails. Robert looked at Margaret. She looked at Patricia. We'd like to hear those recordings, Margaret said. I provided them that afternoon. 7 recordings spanning November 2022 through May 2023. Each one documented Trevor acknowledging the findings in my reports while explaining why they shouldn't be escalated. The audit committee met in executive session the following Monday. I wasn't included in that meeting. On Tuesday, I received an email from Patricia. Trevor Gaines had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the compliance review. I was asked to report directly to Patricia until further notice. The email also informed me that the company had retained outside legal counsel to conduct a broader investigation into compliance practices across all regions. I was interviewed by the attorneys 3 times over the next month. Each interview covered the same ground: what I'd observed, what I'd reported, how Trevor had responded, why I hadn't escalated to corporate. I answered every question directly and provided complete documentation. In late July, Summit's Board of Directors held a special meeting. The agenda included the findings of the compliance investigation and recommendations for corrective action. Trevor Gaines was terminated for failure to fulfill his compliance oversight responsibilities and for deliberately withholding material risk information from corporate compliance and the board. 2 facility administrators were also terminated for ongoing staffing violations. Summit entered into a voluntary disclosure agreement with the State Healthcare Licensing Board regarding the medication documentation and staffing issues. The company paid a fine of $400,000 and agreed to enhanced monitoring for 2 years. The billing practices were referred to external auditors. No fraudulent activity was found, but Summit revised its coding procedures and implemented additional oversight controls. I was promoted to Regional Compliance Director and given supervisory authority over all compliance officers in Arizona and Nevada. My compensation increased by 40%. Patricia Voss asked me to help redesign the company's compliance reporting structure to ensure that high-risk findings would automatically escalate to corporate and the board, regardless of regional director approval. I stayed with Summit for another 1.5 years. The new reporting structure worked. Compliance issues were identified earlier and addressed more systematically. The culture shifted from viewing compliance as an operational inconvenience to treating it as a core business function. But the experience had changed something for me. I'd spent 18 months doing my job correctly, while my supervisor systematically buried my work. When the truth finally surfaced, it was only because an external governance review forced the documentation into the open. I left Summit in January 2025 to take a Chief Compliance Officer role at a smaller healthcare company. Better title, better pay, direct reporting line to the CEO and board. I still keep detailed records. I still document every significant finding in writing. I still save every email with read receipts enabled. But now, when I file a compliance report, it goes directly to the board. No intermediaries. No supervisors who can decide what gets escalated and what gets buried. Trevor landed a regional director position at a different healthcare company about 8 months after leaving Summit. I saw the announcement on LinkedIn. I didn't reach out. But I did think about that email he sent to Karen Lindholm. The one where he claimed my reports didn't exist. The one where he tried to frame 18 months of documented compliance violations as a performance issue on my part. The thing about documentation is that it's binary. Either it exists or it doesn't. Either you filed it or you didn't. Either you sent the email or you didn't. And when someone claims that documented facts don't exist, they're not making an argument about interpretation or context. They're making a factual assertion that can be proven true or false. I had 17 quarterly reports, 43 emails, and 7 recorded phone calls that proved it false. That was enough.